They didn't mention things like the weather radio. NOAA weather radio is good. It has the emergency alert system on it. AM, FM radio, we all know, we heard a lot from KZYX and KLLG. A lot of that information came through. And we're going to talk about a little bit on this panel what we can do as a community. The Office of Emergency Services is discussing maybe putting in a broadcast station, so we'd have an AM or FM radio that you can tune into to hear specific information, not just their dispatch kind of information. And also, you'll see some information on the tables over here about radios. For example, we can have our own walkie-talkies or VHF radios in our communities. Like Greenfield Ranch, for example, they have a series of people that have good viewpoints and lookouts, and they each have their own radio so they can communicate with each other on an event, and then the phone tree to catch those that don't have radios or whatever. So these are the kinds of things we can do as citizens, as communities, and as we heard from the first responders, the public safety folks, we have to organize ourselves. So the more we can work in our neighborhoods and our communities, and as a big group, we'll be able to pull in more funding and more responsibility. So the next panel, we got Jeff Tunnell, and Jeff is with the Bureau of Land Management. He's got many hats. He's here today as the Firewise USA mentor for this area. Firewise is a national program, the National Fire Protection Association, and I'll let Jeff tell you more about it, but it's something we can do as a community to organize, whether it's by individual subdivision or as a group of communities, and go after fire prevention. This will help our insurance costs. And then we're also going to have, following this presentation, we'll have a little bit about CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team. And since Ruth isn't here, I'll talk a little bit about that. That said, I'll let Jeff take over here and see what we've got to say.
Again, my name is Jeff Tunnell. I'm a fire mitigation and education specialist with the Bureau of Land Management. I've been working in the fire service since 1983. Started out in Wyoming, moved up to Northern California, was in the Klamath Mountains, so I really know what remote areas look like. This is a metropolis, the town of 600 I lived in for 20 years. But I moved to Lake County in 2001 and have been covering these counties since then. For the Bureau, I am the entire fire staff for 9 counties. So, let you know, under our statewide agreement, CAL FIRE protects BLM lands in this part of the state. So mostly, I mean, they're my fire department, just as they are yours. And so I do wear many, many hats. I answer questions, anything related to fire. I may not be able to help, but I can certainly answer the phone. Couple things, I need to make a disclaimer. So I do work with communities to work on the Firewise Communities program. I do not work for Firewise. I have no official affiliation with Firewise. But my job title includes community assistance. And I saw a need in all the surrounding counties and this county. There was a vacuum for this program. There was nobody helping or pushing this program in our county. So I decided an extra duty as assigned, or even unassigned. And so it's a program I think is well worthwhile. What is Firewise USA's? A little bit of history. It started out with a bunch of scientists trying to come up with a fire-resistant plant list. And from that little group, they said, well, okay, then there's plants. Well, then they got into home construction, and then they got into landscaping, they got into the whole program, and they created a national program out of this little group. And so what does Firewise do? It's a voluntary program. I don't push it on anybody. If you want me, I will come and assist you, but it's something you need to want to do. It's not a government program in the sense that it brings you any resources or money. It's basically helping you help yourselves. What does the program do? It helps you define a community, and you define, everything in Firewise is self-defined. You decide what your community looks like. It can be the end of a road association. I have one in Lake County that's 19 homes. It can be as big as the entire township of Brooktrails, or you can break it up into smaller ones. But you define your community. We come out, we do a risk assessment. I help with that. We talk about what's good, what's bad, what needs to be done. You promise to do a Firewise event every year, and you promise to invest in yourselves. And what they do is you apply, you get recognized as a Firewise community. But what the program does is help you focus, helps you become organized, and it helps you set goals that are achievable. And that's a hard thing in fire prevention and home preparedness, is to know where to start and to know how to progress. There's nothing more discouraging than trying to do everything at once and failing at them all. So it helps you to prioritize and focus and achieve goals. And I tell people, you're gonna come up with a list of things you wanna do. Pick 2 and accomplish them the first year. The next year, pick the next 2 highest. Don't try to do it all at once, because again, it's not gonna happen and you're gonna get discouraged. So what else does the Firewise program do? It gives you a framework, and it helps you get organized, and it provides expertise, materials, and information on how you can help yourselves. People say, well, the bottom line is, what does it do for me? It doesn't bring you money, it doesn't bring you any kind of government assistance, but what it can do, and we're seeing this, there's actually an insurance company now, USAA, that provides Firewise communities with a break in their rates. First time that's ever happened. More importantly, it might help you keep insurance. I live in Lake County, I work in Ukiah. They don't call it redlining, but parts of Lake County are redlined. People are going to Lloyd's of London to insure their homes. And so being a Firewise community may help you in that process. A, because you're going to be improving your fire response area, and you can point that out, but it's a way of being recognized. And it can help with grant applications. If you are applying for a grant and you can tell them that you are a Firewise community, you may help your cause. How does the process work? Recently, the National Fire Protection Association took over the program nationally. They have made it completely online. I didn't know that till this year. I went in and I created a fake community, and it took me about 20 minutes. So the process is relatively simple. There's things you got to do. You need to do a community assessment. Again, I help you with that. We come out, we do a walk around, we do a drive around. I can fill in portions of it about fire history, worst case scenarios, those kind of things. You fill in the information that the demographics and what you do. Second thing is they want to see a plan. I don't know if you're familiar with the Black Bar community, their Firewise. Their plan was 1 page. They don't want you to get bogged down in the process. They want you to get started. And 3, they want to see an investment. And this has changed from the old program as they now count how many habitable structures you have within your defined community. And they want to see a $27 a year investment in per structure. And what they do is, and you're not paying them anything. Anything you do counts against that goal. And they give a volunteer $27 an hour as a credit. So if you spend an hour working around your home, you sign yourself up as a volunteer, you've met the goal. I know this community actually has paid fuel breaks and those things. All those things count. It's not a hard goal to achieve, but they want to see you investing in yourselves. This is a program for you to help yourselves. And so once and you need to do a Firewise Day event. This could be construed as a Firewise Day event. So they just want to see documentation that you guys did something, that you're continuing the program. And so once you get accepted, you'll get nice signs at the bottom, wherever you put them, saying Firewise Community, you get recognition, a little article in the newspaper. But mostly, again, it's about you helping yourselves. And one of my little plugs is, why do I get involved with this, and why do I want you to do it? Helping yourselves and helping my community is a really good goal. My #1 goal is for my firefighters to come home at the end of the day with all their fingers and toes and kiss their family. And so anything our community can do to help them achieve that goal is my motivation. So that's why I do this. A couple other things. And this is off of the Firewise thing, but one of the things that you can do as a goal is a lot of things. You can do, well, someone mentioned addressing, home construction, water supply, road access. These are all Firewise goals, and you're doing a lot of them. Take credit for what you're already accomplishing. I mean, you can put something on your goal list and then check it off immediately if you're working on it. So yeah, get credit for what you're already doing. That's just one tool in what we call our toolbox. They aren't here, but fire safe councils are another thing that can help you get focused, do programs. Now, they can actually help financially. To become in this county, they call them baby councils. There's, I think, 11 of them now. But the main county fire safe council is the 501(c). So they can be a pass-through for grant applications, for monies, for the baby councils to do projects. And so there is another tool in your toolbox. And again, a local fire safe council works on local issues. So there is another tool in your toolbox. I know Lake County, I live in Lake County. We've burned 30% of our county in the last 5 years. So unfortunately, large damaging fires are nothing new anymore. When the North Bay fires went off, I got a call at 3 in the morning. And again, I cover 9 counties, including the North Bay. I was locked up. I didn't know which fire to go to. So I picked the 2 closest. I picked the Redwood and the sulfur fire in Lake County. And then finally got over to Napa, Sonoma 2 days later. So when it comes to the fire danger, every year I think, well, I'll never see another fire like that. And then the next year it happens. The fires we're seeing now, we're seeing every year. So they're going to happen. And so what you can do is prepare yourself. And 2 things I like to see is A, community preparedness, but then individual preparedness. You can have a fire-proof home. It's not going to look like what you're living in now, but it's an achievable goal. And here's my pitch for that. Wouldn't it be nice to walk out the door in the middle of the night under an evacuation, lock up your door, and know your house would be there when you got back? Wouldn't that be a great feeling? And so those are the things. You shouldn't care how the fire started, or what started it, how it got there. You need to care about what the results of it are. Because fire doesn't care how it started. It just wants to burn. And so realize that how you respond to it is your responsibility. Little thing, my wife is a retired Forest Service. She understands my life. She understands that if we have a fire, I'm going to be on the fire. She's home alone. And so we have plans in place. My go bag is a 7-foot trailer permanently attached to my truck pointed out on our driveway. Because by the time she gets the animals in the car, it's full. So we actually had to practice this last 5th of July. Our neighbor's travel trailer burned down 20 feet from my house. Wow. Yeah, in the middle of the afternoon. I wasn't home. And so her evacuation plan didn't go as she thought it would. So again, practice makes perfect. So one thing I teach kids is, you all do fire drills at school. Do you do them at home? It's a good thing to set a timer, and then when the bell goes off, say, okay, I've got 10 minutes to evacuate. What do I do? Because the reason firefighters train is so that we don't have to think about things when things are happening. It should be muscle memory. And so it's the same thing with people in their homes. Train, practice, get that go bag going and prepared and sit it by the front door for the rest of the summer. Be prepared, because as we've discovered, when things are going bad here, they're probably going bad a lot of places, and help is a long ways away. And so, again, take responsibility for your own lives. Don't wait for the fire department. If you see smoke, you hear sirens, get out. Because waiting for us, especially in the face of communication failures, we have fire after fire. Same thing happened in Lake County during the Valley Fire. People were waiting for the government to tell them to get out. So be prepared to make your own decisions on that. That's all I have for Firewise. I have a wealth of knowledge on a lot of subjects, so if you want to talk to me after or during the break, go ahead. But that's about what I have.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jeff, for that.
Sure.
We did register a Sherwood Communities Firewise site, so I did the same thing you did. And we also have established a project with the Mendocino Fire Safe Council. That particular one was for a fuel break along Blue Lake Road, which is the ridge between here and the ocean along the Brooktrails. But the point being, we can all work together to put these projects online. And it doesn't have to be a lot, you just have to sort of specify a road, what you want to do, put that project in to the Fire Safe Council, and then if we get grant funding in the future becomes available, that project's already sitting there. Similarly with Firewise, being signed up on the Firewise, and what Jeff just mentioned, this is a Firewise meeting, so this counts as our annual meeting. And we can also, again, reorganize as smaller groups, but we do have a Firewise, Sherwood Communities Firewise Council, and that's sort of one of the things on the survey that you have, the survey form about, do we want to try to work as a big group with everybody, or we have individual property owner associations, what makes sense for us to organize, both from project kind of things of getting funding, and like Paloma's here representing the Gates, they're working on a project to do a survey of their roads, and then there's some grant monies available to match those funds if you have a plan in place for roads. In their case, it's sedimentation related kind of things. There's a table over here with grant opportunities on it. We can get matching funds, 75% for roads and 90% for vegetation under certain conditions. So these are things that we organize, like you're hearing from all of our public safety agencies. If we organize on our side, we can have better shot at any kind of funding coming down. And there is more money coming through because of these increased fire dangers and whatever. So again, the more organized we are, the better chance we're going to have at getting access to those funds. I wanted to just talk a little bit more about the Fire Safe Council. Firewise is a voluntary national kind of program. If you get on their website, and again, there's materials on these tables here you can take with you. There's a great checklist. This piece here is on that table over there. It's a really great sort of a checklist to take home and look at. And so Firewise has its own set of activities, and as Jeff was mentioning, we can do an assessment. We can have a plan of things we want to do, and then start implementing those plans, and that's very important. Fire Safe Council they're not redundant, it's just a different organizational structure, voluntary, we can do that too, there's not a big commitment there. But again, that has access to some grant funds if we're organized. So we have to think about funding when we're thinking about these things, because there's lots of great ideas, but it all comes down to somebody's got to do something and you need some budgets to do that with. So that's part of us coordinating now. A couple of the other things on the Community Emergency Response Team, CERT. And I thought we were going to have a speaker today, Ruth Hubble from CERT, but it's another organization. This is a training for homeowners. How many of you have taken CERT training out there? Great, quite a few. It's a lot of the basics about, you just practice with a fire extinguisher. If none of you ever used a fire extinguisher before, little things like that. As Jeff's saying, it's like practice makes perfect. If you've never done something before, you're going to be hesitant about it, but if you've had that kind of practice, you're not as afraid of that. Similarly, there's some first aid training, because in like a big earthquake, you might have traumas that you have to deal with immediately. Everything from learning about CPR to things about how to stop bleeding and whatever. There's those kinds of basics. And just in general, what can you do around your house to become more prepared for fire, earthquake, and even things like flood. You all remember the time Willits was shut off 4 different directions because of floodwaters, and it lasted a little while. And so if you don't have food, if you don't have power, if you don't have those kind of water, you need to prepare for those kinds of things. I think one of the biggest things, and the first panel talked about a little bit, is communications. And that seems to be the thing that I've heard the most from people in talking with all of you out there is how do we find out about it in the first place? And we heard the first panel saying about decisions being made, whether to do a reverse 911 or whether to do the bigger Amber Alert kind of a push. How do we find out? Well, if you've got scanners, you can listen to certain things, AM, FM radio, there's certain things being put out there, but we need to get a lot better at our communications. And so part of that, if you just start, I like to look at it from the home, working out, so you've got your own communications with your family. Does everybody know where everybody's going to be as far as your plan and how to get a hold of each other? And what's your plan if it's the middle of the night versus what's your plan if it's in the middle of the day during a work day when the kids are in school and you're working or whatever? You have to think through all of those kind of scenarios and have that at home. A local phone tree is another sort of branching out now. And again, Paloma and the folks at the gates are working on a phone tree where you've got sort of the top tier of the phone tree. Yeah, and please help Paloma if you're a member of the gates. She's trying to get more information on that. Yeah, all this social media, electronic, there's a lot of places to log in. There's a Facebook site for the Sherwood Communities Firewise. The fire department has one as well. But as far as phone tree goes, knowing your neighbors locally, talking to them regularly, thinking about things like who has a viewpoint towards certain places. I mean, from my house, I can see out over the Noyo Valley and all of Highway 20, and I was watching to see if those fires were coming up from Redwood Valley. As soon as it said it was jumped over into the Golden Row community and up into the valley coming up this way, I was like, oh my gosh, this is, I'm looking at my map saying it's heading this way. We can see that kind of stuff. And so people that have viewpoints like that, work with your neighbors so that you could call some people and let them know, because some of us can't see out of our communities, we don't know. And some of people don't have good cell phone reception, for example, and if you're living in a little valley. So these are the kind of things, by working with your neighbors, you can sort of find out maybe there's elderly or disabled or otherwise special needs kinds of things. So again, large animals, I mean, all of these things come into play. Be thinking about that ahead of time, but have communication capabilities. And so if you have a cell phone, you can use that. Satellite internet has been mentioned, and I know that I was online the whole time with our satellite internet because that didn't go down. So if you have access to that kind of a service, that's another. The fire department now has cable and satellite, so they've got redundancy. Those are important things to think about. And even just having that little portable radio for the emergency alerts. And I was talking with Rick Ellert with Office of Emergency Services, and they are discussing putting up some kind of broadcast system on AM or FM kind of radio that could be more local, community-oriented kind of information as compared to the public safety side, where those guys need to be using their dispatch for what they're using it on. And even ham radio in that last the Redwood fires, the ham radio was doing a lot of technical things for the fire department and the hospital and whatever, so that came in handy. But it wasn't really for mom and dad and the kids at home to try to figure out what was going on. And I think that's what I hear mostly from our community. How do we know what's going on? And then secondly, how do we know what to do next? Because as we just heard, and this is a good map, and I want to mention Josh Kitchens with CAL FIRE brought this for us today. This is the map of, you can see, and we'll do it at the break, you can see Sherwood Road goes all the way up to the Y on the road and then all the way back up to 101. So for those who haven't driven Sherwood Road north, you can drive all the way up to hit Highway 101.
How many of you have driven north Sherwood?
Yeah, so quite a few. And Brian and I just drove it the other day in my Prius. There's still water in a little creek you have to cross, but we just went right through it, so it really wasn't a big deal. And obviously during the fire season, it probably would be dry anyway, so we shouldn't have to worry. But and then I was glad to hear John Noyer talking about other safe zones, because exit routes are great. So right now we just have Sherwood Road north or south. That's pretty much it. The other exit routes we're going to have to keep revisit. We only have one safe zone right now, and that's the airport. That's sort of official. But as John was saying, if you go out and drive out Sherwood Road, there's all kinds of big open areas that we could have places that with the landowner's agreement that we could go out and have a safe zone to pull into for just a short period of time until the fires are died down a little bit. And CAL FIRE has talked about even being able to support that kind of activity. They could burn that off before the fire season, for example, so it was already cleared. We could have gates put in so that the landowner is involved. These are the kinds of things where us as a community, if we're together in the planning, then we negotiate with some of these landowners and say, can we put a big water tank on your site so the fire trucks will have another source of water out this far? Can we clear a little area here where people only during an emergency can come? Those are the kinds of things that we have to rely upon our public agencies to help us with, but we as citizens, many of us know some of these landowners and these people, and we have to think about not only being friendly and negotiating, but also it may cost some money for us to do that, and it's certainly going to cost money to improve those exit routes and maintain those exit routes over time. So these are the kind of things that, and actually Supervisor Grosky is going to speak a little bit to funding and how we might be able to fund some of these efforts. There are grants available, and this table next to Brian over there has several different grant opportunities, so we can work as a community to identify some of these projects. So whether it's the road survey to figure out where you could use some better drainage to prevent sedimentation, there's funding for that, or to do some of these forestry related things where you clear along the roads. that takes owner's permission. So for example, Greenfield Ranch, I now have all their forms that are CAL FIRE approved, and they went through and they got every landowner to agree to let them come and clear back the roads onto their private property a certain amount. Now, they want as far out back as they can get. 60 feet from the center line is you know, sort of typical, but even 100 feet is even better. So again, this is something that takes all of us talking and working together to come up with those agreements so that people say, okay, it's all right with me if you want to clear back some of the vegetation off the road. And I know, talking with Paloma, that's going to be one of the issues of they may get grant funds to work on the road, but if the vegetation isn't taken off the road, they're not going to be able, the road guys aren't going to be able to get and do their work. So it's a sort of a combination of needing to having funding for the forestry related kind of work as well as for the road kind of work. And I'm mainly talking private roads. People live in Brooktrails would have the county to help maintain those roads, but even with that, those roads need to be maintained as well, and things like parking along the roads is sometimes a problem, and vegetation management along those roads is the same thing very much.
If I can just add to what Keith is saying here, and maybe just bring up a point that Deputy Chief Neuer does mention a lot. All of this, in terms of egress and exit routes, is all dependent on the fire conditions and the wind at the time. So it's not the case that there will be an exit route that everyone goes down. This is why we need to be very, very cognizant of this and take the lead from our sheriff and OES and through the battalion chief of CAL FIRE and so on, right down to our local district fire department. So this is always very important. Communication, as Keith is saying, is really job number one, along with being prepared. So do remember that. I've had to learn that lesson too, that it's not just that these are all the exits we take, we've got to know on the day, and that's why we take the lead from our professionals.
Excellent. And not to drill on it too much, but the address sign, it sort of starts at home. How many of you have the nice green reflective address sign up with the big reflective letters? Not many of you. Okay, it's a big, big deal. And you heard your Deputy Chief Neuer talking about that, driving along, can't find a driveway because people are dependent upon some cute little sign that's got, you know, a little birdie sitting on it and some kind of funny looking numbers, and it's very artsy. But if it's in the middle of the night and you're trying to find somebody because they're having trouble breathing or there's a fire, you want something that really stands out from 100 feet away that you know you're getting there and you know what that address is right on the driveway. So Mendo Mill, Jay here with Mendo Mill has an exhibit in the back. And when we take our lunch break, the idea is to sort of go around and look at those things. And actually, they've got a raffle too. I want to announce that again, that they are giving away some things here. So be sure to enter your name in the raffle. But that address sign is where it really starts, because they're not going to be able to find you. And you heard one of the things that I heard about this latest fire, and it happens all the time, is you get people from out of the area responding. Because in a big situation like we had, they may be bringing people from out of state even. They don't know Third Gate, they don't know Sherwood Ranch, they don't know any of this stuff. Right. So the better maps that we have in the first place, and again, that's sort of on us, but GPS only gets you close. And if anybody's ever tried to find your house with GPS, you know what that's like, you know. It takes you to the middle of nowhere, but you have to have that address sign, and even better, some directions on how to get there. And again, I think this is something Paloma's working on with individual property owner. Yeah, that sign there.
How many of you feel the sense of urgency to get proper reflective signs for your house? Yeah.
Good.
Usually the height of the hand is a measure of how confident you feel about doing that. I'll ask you again, how many of you will get proper signage? Good. Okay. So Keith,
and they're giving some away in the back there too.
Yes,
I had a couple other things. So on the back, I wanted to mention on the back of your agenda, if you haven't seen that, there's a to-do list. And these are just things. Okay, sure. On the back of the agenda, there's a to-do list, checklist kind of thing. And again, you probably heard all these things and sort of kind of know them, but helps you focus on that. And one of those is registering with the citizen, with the alert notification of reverse 911. The second thing on there is put your fire sign up. These are things we can do together as well. So, you know, us that have the Property Owner Association know what it's like to get volunteers to try to come out and do vegetation clearing and whatever. It doesn't work really well. I think we need to look at another way to raise money to pay people to do those kinds of things on an ongoing basis. And that's something else, again, Supervisor Grosky, we've been asking for information on how we can assess ourselves, if you will, to help pay for some of these things. And I mentioned the survey form that we want you to fill that out too, because one of the things I'm curious about meetings, and because it's great that you're here for this. I know it's really difficult to organize a get together like this, so thank you everybody for coming. It makes me really joyful that we have this opportunity to work together to plan before something does happen, instead of some of our friends that are in Redwood Valley, they're now planning on how they're going to recover from such a terrible thing. So we're very fortunate that we have that opportunity, but we are in the middle of a huge potential problem here, and we've really got to take it seriously, and I know that's why you folks are here, but it's going to take time and people and money and patience. Our public officials can only do so much. We have to do more of that ourselves, so we're looking for volunteers, so there's a whole volunteer board in here. If you can volunteer for anything, please put that on there. That's on your survey form as well, and I mean, whether that's just getting a phone tree with 4 or 5 of your neighbors, that's great. If you can help us do fundraising or whatever, that's great. Anything you can do, if you've got equipment, you can volunteer to help with equipment or labor, whatever, all those things. And as Jeff was mentioning, that even counts as money, $27 an hour towards our Firewise goals of being able to invest in our community table. So the CERT trainings in Redwood Valley are May 5th and the 3 weeks in May. We won't have one until fall for Willits and Brooktrails, and that'll be up at Howard Station. So they haven't announced the dates for that yet, but we can carpool and get to Redwood Valley for that CERT training for those of you that haven't had the CERT training. And it is really an important thing to do. It's a very valuable thing to have. How many of you have a fire extinguisher at home? I like it. All right. And so these are, those are the kind of things do you know how to use it? Have you ever used one? And this is the funny thing at the CERT training was, you see people that's like, yeah, I know what a fire extinguisher is, but I've never actually pulled that pin and pressed that button and had it go all over the place. And so it's something that, you really need to practice those kinds of things. And same thing with medical and safety. So that's why that CERT training really does get you, used to doing things for that. So we could maybe get into our questions a little earlier.
I don't know if Brian knows it, but the ham radio thing is a real good thing. I was on a backcountry horseman's ride back on the McIsaac Ranch out of Covelo, and this guy ended up shooting himself in the leg. And the guy got a hold of somebody up on Tomkai, and CAL FIRE was taking him out in less than 40 minutes.
Yeah, and we have some ham radio folks here, and there are trainings.
There was a blurb in the paper about it, that ROC, they're giving classes or something?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And the scanner, you can get a scanner to listen to the ham radio as well, so you can actually hear people talking on that. So that's definitely, any kind of radio communications is very important, because we saw what happened to our communication systems. We asked Supervisor Grosky at the last meeting we had, we started talking about how to fund some of these things. Now, the second access to Brooktrails is one of those long-term. Funding is very important to make these things happen. Second access, those of you in Brooktrails are aware of that long-term effort, and we still want to continue to proceed with that. What I'm hearing from community members is we need more immediate action on some evacuation routes, some other safe zones, some other improvements like we talked about, maybe some water supplies that fire hydrants can draft off of, maybe radio communication infrastructure, there's things like that that we could possibly fund for emergency services over and beyond what we have with our fire department. And even to our private roads, when we look at our private roads, and I've spoken with quite a few in road associations about how we could possibly band together to have a funding source to pay for our roads that we assess ourselves like we already are, but have a little more efficient system of collecting the money without it having to be the volunteer that knocks on the door and says, hey, I haven't paid your road dues yet. So there's some creative things we can do for fundraising in addition to grants, but I think one of those is going to be somehow assessing ourselves in the long run. So that's why we asked Supervisor Grosky to sort of look into that, and so I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you so much everyone for coming, and thank you for having me here. And I just want to echo a lot of the comments that people made this morning, just thanking Keith and Brian for setting this up. It's so important. What they have always said is, give them a round of applause. The comment that you hear often is all disasters are local, and I honestly used to think that was kind of a way to shirk duty at the federal level or the state level or the county level. But it's very true, and it's, everyone has their role, and there's definitely a role for you and your neighbors. So I think it's really important at this level to know that that disaster might just be you and your neighbors, and you need to make sure that you make those connections. And it's not just the immediate disaster of people knocking on your door, or the people that were driving up and down East and West Road, laying on their horns, waking people up to get out of their homes. But it's also going to be, the days that you're evacuated. I mean, we were evacuated for 9 days on Pine Mountain, and as much as I managed to shove the 3 kids and the dogs and the cats and the hamsters and 11 goats and all the important paperwork into my minivan to leave. We probably didn't bring enough clothes for 11 days, and there was a goat we couldn't catch, and the neighbors certainly left animals behind too. And it might be a long time. You might not just be out for a couple of days. So I think it's important to have those connections while you're considering evacuating, while you are evacuating, and then afterwards. Know where you're going to go. Have a few different locations in case where you do evacuate to also gets evacuated. We evacuated to my parents' house, which was under pre-evacuation, and just had things hooked up and ready to go. There's only limited escort back into the evacuation areas. And that's not something I think we plan for when we're doing our original preparation. So I just want to address that a little bit. There is some escort from animal control or from sheriffs or whoever is manning some of those road stops, but they're not going to be able to take everybody back in. So you need to make sure you're in connection with your neighbors after evacuation so that one person can maybe stop and feed everybody's animals. Or if somebody gets to go up and grab some medication, they can grab other neighbors' medications too. So just make sure you have more than just a landline. Make sure you have some cell phones or know where they're going to be evacuated to in case cell phones are down. The fires in Redwood Valley and Potter Valley and up through Willits were not something that anybody was truly prepared for, even if you had your preparation ready. Earlier in the year, we had gone as the Fire Safe Council on a tour for the grade fire that had happened earlier in the year. And there was an individual, and he has been planning for that fire forever. And he had everything weeded down to dirt. He had storage tanks. He had water for the firefighter to hook up to. He had open spaces for them to stage out of. And he kept that fire from progressing down into Redwood Valley because of his home preparation. Now, we're not all going to get that chance. And maybe all we're going to do is be able to stop some of the damage, save some outbuildings, but you might be able to save your house, or you might be able to stop it from progressing to other people's homes. So I think it is important to take that local responsibility and join up with Firewise, join up with the Fire Safe Council, and see what you can do to harden your home. So I do sit on the Mendocino Fire Safe Council, and I do think that in the short term is going to be a good option for some of the emergency funding. So there's a lot of grant funding through the Fire Safe Council. There's PG&E funds, there's CAL FIRE funds, resource conservation. There is a lot of grant funding for fuel breaks and chipping days, things like that. So I do think that is something that everybody needs to try to be involved in. Some of the events that the Pine Mountain Fire Safe Council has done, so Pine Mountain is a fire safe and a Firewise community. So this past year, they did bring CAL FIRE out to do tours and inspections of people's homes to see if they were prepared and to give advice on what they could do to harden their home. They also do chipping days, and you can limb up your trees and have a way to dispose of it. So those are just some ideas of things that Brooktrails could do if you join together, whether that's an individual road association or that's overall Sherwood Community Fire Safe Council. But I would certainly want Brooktrails to be more involved in the Mendocino County Fire Safe Council. There is a lot that we do, and one thing I will bring up is the Mendocino Fire Safe Council has been selling the green signs. They've sold hundreds of them going to the Redwood Valley community meetings, as well as some of the ad hoc meetings that we put on and have signs available. So, that's something that your local Fire Safe Council or the Mendocino Fire Safe Council could put on and have a little fundraising event to sell the signs. And then use some of those proceeds for perhaps some other type of, chipping event. But I agree, I think the signs, everybody should have them. One of the other things that we found in Pine Mountain was that the local maps that were made by the Fire Safe Council were handed out in a sheet form to the firefighters as they came up, especially the ones from out of state. Because a lot of these roads are not well marked. A lot of the Google or Apple maps don't necessarily take you where they should. They say things connect when they don't. So I think it's important to have a good local map of, all of the back roads and what really does connect and what does not, and what the names are. And maybe that's what the name really is and what people call it. So I think, that's a good undertaking too for local preparation. I know I'm supposed to talk funding, but I want to talk some other fire safe.
Personal experience, this is great. We've got a lot to learn from Pine Mountain,
Yeah, certainly, and just the fire in general. As far as my own personal experience, it was certainly, nerve-wracking, and I have my kids and my parents, and I'm trying to make sure I could get as many public events scheduled in Willits because we didn't have the communication. So, trying to coordinate sheriffs and CAL FIRE and to come up and speak up in Willits to make sure that everybody was informed, as well as treating the large animal evacuation center. So it's, your normal day-to-day stuff isn't gonna go away just because there's an emergency. So you have to have lots of extra plans in place. So the after-action report from that fire is still in the works. I think that Mendocino County is farther ahead than some of the other counties in our after-action report. And people are pushing pretty hard to have us hurry up and get it done, but it's not something that we want to hurry up. It's something that needs to be very thorough and needs to be a good document that we truly can learn from. However, it doesn't keep us from doing some of the recommended actions as we go. And so, certainly we've added a lot more of the CERT classes, the ham radio classes. So there's a lot of stuff that is still going on and is being changed, even though that after action report from the fire has not come out. Well, let's talk some of the funding. So, I got involved with the Brooktrails ad hoc. I started trying to work on it before the fires even happened, just to work with second access. But after the fires, it was really an ideal time for us to look at emergency access and overall second access for Brooktrails. So there is, the road going north. And as much as a lot of people in here raised their hands, I was facing this way so I couldn't see, but you said there were. There are a lot of people I've spoken to that actually did not even know that road was passable. So I think that at the last meeting we discussed a caravan going out North Sherwood, and I think that would be very worthwhile. So one of the things that I have worked with transportation is for better signage. So, right now, again, like I said, there's a lot of people that don't know exactly where they're going, and you should drive it first before it's an emergency. But, if you are taking a road that you don't know where it goes in an emergency, sometimes it feels like maybe you're on the wrong path, you don't know how much farther you have to go, you're not really sure where to turn. So one of the things that I've done with the Department of Transportation, and I'll leave these for people to look at, is to put signs up. So these would be all the locations of signs, and thank you. And we'll set them out so you can look at them, because certainly these are not set in stone, but I do want to push to get them out before the summer. So these are all locations of signs that one way will say Laytonville with the mileage, in parentheses gravel, so you're not headed down a paved road, and then the other way Willits with the mileage. So there will be one at the Y, and then there also is one, I asked for another one halfway down. So, it's 7 miles of gravel there. But for people that don't drive regularly on gravel roads, it can seem like you're going forever. And it could be at night. So I've asked for another sign at the 3-mile mark, so that 3 more miles and you'll get there. So these would be all the locations of signs that we put on that North Sherwood, and throughout Sherwood. So as you come up, you'll see exactly where to go. And I think one of them also says Fort Bragg 23 miles, but it does indicate that is not passable in winter. So I'll leave these here. I would like people to look at them, and I would certainly like comments on them before we get them ordered and before we get them put up. So you can, contact me directly. You can go through the Brooktrails Township. You can go through Keith. But some comments if you think there's anything else that we should do different. Otherwise, these will be up, hopefully, before summer, which is quickly approaching. But that way, when we do caravans out, or if you just want to go drive it yourself, you can see exactly where you're going and feel safe that you're not going to get lost on that road. So that is one thing that that I've been working on, and I think we've got a good plan forward, and hopefully it's gonna happen here shortly. So as far as actual funding, I'm not sure that everyone in this room is gonna be a part of deciding where to go forward with on the funding, but I wanna make sure we throw some options out there so you can have input and that you're aware of it when it's brought to you, of what's going to be brought forward. So in 2005, there was a study done by County Council and the Department of Transportation on what is a feasible way for private roads to do maintenance themselves. So there's kind of three main ways, and before I get into those though, I'm going to briefly mention the Boulevard District, which has been brought up as an option here. So the Boulevard District, the main differences between that and the other way we're looking is that with the Boulevard District, you're not going through the Board of Supervisors and through LAFCO to be the oversight. So you are going to have your own special election and then oversee it yourselves. Now that would have to be, the special election would have to be funded by the people that are trying to do it. So that, I think that is, I don't know the costs on that, but that could be an issue, trying to fund that special election for the Boulevard District. So the other options is to do a CSA, so that's a county service area. So these are going through LAFCO to get approved, and then the Board of Supervisors basically is the one who then oversees it.
Could you explain what LAFCO is? Stands for?
It's the
Local agency formation.
formation, there we go,
Commission.
formation. So
Commission.
Local Agency Formation Commission, so all these are different local agencies that we're looking at setting up. So the CSA, there's several ways that it can be initiated. So either the Board of Supervisors can do it, you can have a request that's written by 2 of the Board of Supervisors. You can have the resolution adopted by a majority vote, or a petition signed by at least 10% of the people in that CSA. And then any tax that CSA wants to do has to be approved by 2/3 of the voters. It's not something that, I think we have 1 or maybe 2 CSAs in the county, and they're currently not funded. And then there's the Community Services District, which is what we currently have with Brooktrails. So, one thing to consider is, if you're looking at a CSD model, is perhaps, and this would be, again, all these decisions are whatever Brooktrails wants to do. I'm here to help facilitate what the decisions are. We could expand the Brooktrails CSD if that's an option. I'm not sure what the bylaws are. I haven't looked at them, but that's something to consider, is having some type of expansion of the Brooktrails CSD. The additional part of the CSD is that they can do bonds. And then the last option, which is something that we discussed, I think, at the last meeting, is having an actual, just a special benefit assessment. So that is where you take an area and you assess the properties on that area for a specific purpose. So that could be a second access. So some of the barriers for the special benefit assessment is you do need to have an engineer study for what that project is and a zone of benefit to show what is the actual benefit for those properties before you can move forward. And that can be somewhat costly. So that's where you might want to be looking at, grant funding to try to, get the engineer study and to get that zone of benefits. And, I don't know how, I think you can have partial zones of benefits if it's, if we're looking at a second access, obviously that will benefit some people more than others. So I think you can have a partial on properties too. So those are some of the main ways to consider moving forward. So Again, I think that Keith has a really good structure and a really good group of people that are wanting to move forward. And I think decisions just have to be made on how to go long-term. And if we do want to get something on the ballot for this year, we do need to get planning soon. And hopefully whoever follows up in my position will continue some of the long-term planning with you for that second access. As I stated at the ad hoc meeting that I think, many of you were there, is we really have 2 different projects here. We've got emergency access and we have second access. And while the second access could eventually be, an emergency thing, a lot of the funding for second access is really going to come through traffic. And it is needed regardless of the emergency access. But we're not gonna be able to fund a second road in and out with emergency funding. I mean, that is gonna be because the traffic in Brooktrails. And I think it is needed, and things take a really long time in the planning cycle, and I think it's something that we need to get started on soon. I'm trying to think if I have any other notes.
Can you describe the special benefit assessment? How would that be? Is that also 2/3 vote of voters, or is that property owners?
You know, I don't know. This one says property assessments are done with the majority vote of the Board of Supervisors. I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to look up.
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head. But you know, like I said, I think the biggest barrier to that one is the engineering study with the zone of benefits. So, you know, not that it's not possible, and I do like the idea of it, but we need to plan it all the way through so we can think about how to pay for the engineering part of it. As far as the emergency stuff, I think that Keith is on the right path, trying to bring in Firewise and FireSafe and grant funding through a lot of organizations. And certainly the county's here to do what we can. So we're moving forward with roads, but certainly anything else that we
And
can
the
help
county's
with.
been doing, I've noticed vegetation management along the roads and also some sealing of the county roads. And I know Paloma, we've been talking about on the private roads, all of us that live in the rural subdivisions, that road clearing is really important. I mean, it's gotten really overgrown. It's huge. And also, there's a little video that came from Firewise on your house with little glowing embers and things like that. And they did the National Fire Protection Association did this short video sitting on the table over there. I was going to put it on a laptop, but we may watch it at some point. But anyway, it just shows that a little pile of duff sitting around by your deck, you know, caught in a little corner. And actually, if you look around your house, you walk around, you'll see where the wind blows stuff in and sort of builds it up. That's the kind of place where those embers are going to go to. And so if you're walking around your house and you see a little place in the corner and there's a little pile of leaves and pine needles and whatever, that's the kind of place that's going to start your house on fire right there. So, you know, your gutters, keeping them clean, keeping the brush away from your house, but it's just all that little stuff makes a huge difference, because a lot of the fires that happen, the big fire goes through and then it's the embers that are blowing. It's not flames against your house per se. I mean, it is sometimes, but it can also just be a little bitty fire that starts and it gets to be bigger and bigger. So there's things, you know, that we can do ourselves. Having the foam spray is another one you may not know about. It's like a soapy foam kind of thing. You can, instead of just spraying water if you're going to leave, you can hose down your deck with this kind of foamy gel kind of stuff, and it coats and it keeps the embers from starting a fire on wood surfaces like that. Hardening your house, we've all talked about that, and again, there's materials on the table here. Mendo Mill has stuff back there. You know, like Paloma was pointing out to me, these things called Vulcan vents. And they're basically a self-closing vent that has a little thermal system in it, so that if it gets hot, it melts and it causes your vent to close, like the under your house vents. Because in a fire, that stuff's going to blow stuff under your house. If you have screen on your vents, you need some pretty fine mesh screen to keep the embers from blowing through. Same thing on your eaves where your overhangs are. You've got little vents all along there. You might even have vents along your ridge top. Those are just places for fire to go through, like a chimney, you know. And so those are some of the things you can do to try to prepare to have something that closes those off, or at least put a really fine mesh screen in those places, and maybe put up some of the hardy siding board. And again, Mendo Mill's got some examples of that cement siding kind of board, especially around your eaves and places like that, because again, those are the ones that tend to get the most exposed, you know, with wind and stuff. And anything you can do to fireproof your house, you know, retrofitting, like Tony Orth, I know Tony and Janet spent a long time putting up hardy siding all around their house. You know, looking at your roofing, you know, maybe you want a better fire resistant roof or metal roofing. And there's things like that we can all do to make our houses safer. I wanted to mention one other thing, which is the PACE financing is one of these special assessments. And that's why I was asking about it, because it allows an individual property owner to assess themselves for things like energy and water improvements. So for example, if you wanted to put in a large rainwater catchment tank at your house and put a fire suppression system on that in addition to irrigation, or in other words a pump and some kind of sprayer, you can fund that through this property assessed clean energy type of program, and that's through a special assessment that the county has approved, so it's available throughout the county. There's several vendors of the PACE financing, and one of them is here today to talk about that. And they can fund solar systems or double glazed windows or things like that, but they can also fund the water system. So having more tanks with a fire hydrant hookup on it, that's something that a lot of us can be thinking about. Having more water storage be really helpful. And that might be a mechanism for us to use something like that Miller-Roos kind of special assessment. I was wondering about the special benefit assessment. That might be what falls under that category. Well, I think that's good. We've got time for some questions, and maybe we should do that. One of the biggest ones is, what are the current exit routes? And I think we sort of talked about that with Sherwood Road being, but who could speak to that? Evacuation. Are there any other routes other than Sherwood Road?
I would say that would have to be a cooperative effort between the Sheriff's Department, Cal Fire, and myself, representing Brooktrails. We currently do not endorse the previous evacuation plan that we produced, the last edition. The fire department's standpoint is we would use Sherwood Road in either direction based on the direction of the fire. And I'm not sure if the Sheriff's Department feels differently, being that they're in charge of evacuations and planning. Shannon?
So I think, again, John pointed out evacuation is incident dependent. So if you have a fire coming from the north end or the south end, you could actually cut off one of the routes. And then, emergency-wise, we may at some point elect to, clean a side road open. It's one of those things, what I'd like to do is have our plan in place. Right now, we have two for sure, ingress, egress, that's north and south, but the purpose of what we're doing now is to plan additional alternatives, and that's the good thing. Emergency basis, we probably could at some point talk to one of the landowners or several of the landowners about just blading the road open to get people out, or provide a safe zone, because that's a lot of what we do in some of the other fires for the fire personnel themselves. Is the line dozers and things will go up and create safe zones that as the fire, if it starts collapsing back on them, they can get to that safe zone and kind of protect themselves. So multitude of different opportunities. I think during an event, I think enough of our landowners would probably be kind of open to that, and we just address it as it goes. But the primary in-out would be north and south on Sherwood Road.
I would just like to expand on that just a little bit. The previously published evacuation routes, we would probably use as access routes for fire equipment. That way we can lessen some of the inbound traffic on Sherwood Road for fire response. So that is definitely an option for us. And while they're coming in, that would be an opportunity for them to improve that road as well. So potentially, further into the incident, we could possibly use those roads once they're improved.
I think in our overall planning, we absolutely need to try and address the concerns of the landowner themselves as well. It's their land, it's their property. We want to work as a partnership with them and not just dictate how we go upon their land, And so that's the ideal goal, is to get into that, a partnership agreement where we address their concerns and we provide another access route in some fashion, even if it's just an emergency basis.
Okay, so I think that's one of the things that we wanted to follow up with is how do we best address as a group? Is it going to be helpful to have citizens putting out that same kind of call for, we really need another access route through this person's property? I know some of the people in the room know some of the private property owners personally. Sometimes just a friendly conversation is good, but I mean, on a more official level, it would seem like we'd need like easements or something so we could have a permanent kind of a agreement to say if we want this to use as a safe zone or use this as an access route, we need some kind of agreement to maintain that, improve it, whatever. So what's the experience on forming a new evacuation route?
No, I would agree. I think whether it's a memorandum of understanding with, about an easement or who's going to address, the maintenance of the road itself and things like that. And then how do you deal with grievances if it's not done according to that agreement, those kind of things. Doesn't have to be seriously complicated, but it is a negotiation process, and it is a mutual meeting with people to say, okay, I understand your point of view, your concern, can we get that agreement put together to address all of those things? And it just needs to be that.
Yeah, that would be routes, evacuation routes as well as safe zone areas, because I know
Correct.
Chief Norrie was talking about seeing some places we could put a bunch of people out there if we had some preparation for it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. One of the other sort of questions I see overall is sort of that initial, how do we find out? We used to have sirens that went off regularly, and that was sort of our local, way back when. We also didn't have telephones and had CB radios and things too, so a lot of us remember the good old days of that kind of thing. There's some issues with the sirens. They don't currently work, and it would cost, I think, $100,000 is what Chief Schaffner said, to replace those sirens. But it comes back to, that's only the wake-up call. What do you do next is, what's going on? How do you find out more information? Because it's one thing to have the alarm go off. It's another thing to then say, what's going on? Where do I go? Which evacuation route should I do? Those kinds of ongoing communication. So if you guys could speak a little bit more to that, of where is a citizen going to listen? I know there's Facebook, social media kinds of things. There's all kinds of stuff flying around, but what's the best place for a citizen to tune in to try to get current evacuation kind of information on? Because like with Brooktrails, like the Deputy Chief Nor was saying, we never really were in an evacuation mode, but there were a lot of people that were concerned about that. So I know they were calling the fire department. That may not be the best thing to do because you tie up the lines. So can you sort of talk about that? What do people do after they sort of know something's going on?
So through the Office of Emergency Services and the Sheriff's Office, and we work with the CEO's office as well, is we have a Facebook site, we have a Twitter account, we have PIOs within the county system to get information out. One of the things that, I kind of need to remind people, similar with the incident in October down in Redwood Valley and Potter Valley, there's what we call the fog of war or the fog of battle, where that first 24-hour period, oftentimes we don't have the full picture, so it's hard to put information out other than immediate emergency response is our priority. Life and property is our immediate response. And on most of the big incidents that I've been on, it takes a little bit, usually about 24 hours, for that information flow to start going out to the public. And it's usually a multitude of things, depending on what. So we have radio, regular AM, FM radio within the county that we can use. We have basically the PIO can put out individual press releases. And people can sign up for our press releases to come to them via email. How many people have signed up for our email press releases? You can do that on our website. You can get information that way. Those press releases are put onto our Facebook account. And then on bigger events, you're going to have probably television media coming in like we had somewhat. But if we have multitude events like we had in Santa Rosa, most of the television media stays down in Santa Rosa and forgets that we exist up here. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. But it is just a multitude of things. So emergency communication, we have the reverse 911 system. You can also buy the little National Weather Service radio that you put in your house that when they send out a signal, because we use their system as well. It's the emergency alert system. It usually triggers your television. In the old days when we got local television, you see that scroll go across the top, or it would start off with that very annoying buzz on your radio, and then you would get an emergency message. But they have individual National Weather Service radios like that once they punch that signal out, then you'll get that emergency message that way as well. So there's a multitude of things. And then the other thing is, I want to keep harping on it because they're a lot more valuable, even though they're not at the forefront all the time, is the ham radio operators. Most of our school districts in the county have ham radio systems in them, and then most of our hospitals do as well. And I think we're starting to have some of the fire departments as well put a ham radio antenna and a hookup for a ham radio operator so that that person can come in, man that, and we can keep that system going as well.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the changes that's being implemented already is that we no longer have to go nearly as far up the chain to send out an evacuation notice, but now we can have the person there on the ground seeing the issues evacuating. So that is one of the changes that, like I said, even though we don't have this after action plan, that we've already put in place.
Correct. We at the county, we recognize that in many cases, the fire department and fire departments can't legally issue an evacuation order. That is the purview of the police departments and the sheriff's office. But realizing that we have one deputy on that end of the county and our fire's on this end of the county, that's really not gonna work. So what we're looking to do is, at least from the sheriff's level, is to transfer some of that authority to the local fire folks, so that, and we'll have a cheat sheet for them to do reverse 911s. This is the information you need to provide to the dispatcher. We need to get that out, what size of the box, as we call it, how big do you want that emergency alert to go, and what do you want to tell them. Sometimes we have direction of travel. One of the things in the October fire that really kind of presented some issues is we did not have an accurate picture of where the fire footprint was. And so we were having a difficult time deciding to tell where to go. You know, you do not want to send people into harm's way, you know, but if you don't have that fire picture, what do you tell them? So what we've elected to do now, moving forward, is you may get an emergency notice that says get out, and that's all it says. You know, we may not know where to send you. You have to have that situational awareness on the ground, because you're there and we're not, to try and best get yourself out of harm's way. But we will try to get those notices out quicker, you know, but it may be just very limited information on what we have.
And just a couple things to add real quick. There's two situations we could be faced with. We could be faced with the Redwood fire, which built its basic footprint in the first operational period. Granted, after it made its first push, it had already crossed 101 into Reeves Canyon and pushed toward Pine Mountain. It was still actively, once the east wind quit, the westward spread slowed dramatically. However, we still had to build a line up on Pine Mountain, that kind of thing. That was the next threat. So you had that initial push, and it is very difficult, fire at night, knowing where to go, such as the lieutenant said. However, with all of our stuff, I heard several comments about Sherwood Road, fire equipment coming in. There's going to be the initial push of a lot of fire engines, but then there's going to be a lull while out of unit, out of county stuff is making its way. So we have an awesome relationship with local and the county sheriff. If they are advising you to use Sherwood, drive carefully and realize that transports are coming up with giant bulldozers and that sort of thing. But you're only going to see 2 or 3 in the first hour and a half. So we will make that work just as we always have. Then you have the other types, such as what I had in December down in Montecito, where it is a well-established fire and we're predicting a wind event. And we know with our fire behavior analysts and our weather folks that it's going to push into Montecito, or it's going to push into Pine Mountain, or it's going to push into Brooktrails. And then we can have a much better conversation between us and law enforcement and local fire with their knowledge as to how to ship people. Or such as the airport. We may ship a bunch of people up to the airport. It's out on the knob there. It's a nice place to temporarily refuge. In fact, we call them temporary refuge areas. But those are a lot of, there is no cookie cutter answer to these questions, because no fire is going to be the same as the last one or what we expect. It's very dynamic. Floods, we know it's raining or the snow's melting. We have a lead time where we can come up with a plan. But like we're seeing, and we've seen for years, fire's going to make its push, and we're going to do the best we can based on the knowledge we have. But we will, that is, protection of life is our first priority.
And I would like to add, as your local first responder, if you're in harm's way, and we know about it, we're going to do everything we can to advise you. On a local level, if you see aircraft circling over Brooktrails, that should be a trigger point in your head, is awareness. It doesn't mean evacuate, it just means it's awareness. If you smell smoke in the dead of summer, and you can see a column, that should be a trigger point in your head, it's awareness. It doesn't mean evacuate, it just means be prepared. So there's a lot of things that you can do on a personal level that doesn't require us to tell you what to do. It's about being aware. Also, early notification. There's an app produced by CAL FIRE for your phone. It's called Ready for Wildfire. The reason why I bring this up is it has a few ideas and checklists for you to do about defensible space around your structure, preparedness to get out, also provides you with fire maps for all the fires that are currently burning in the state, and there's also alerts. That alert will trigger your phone, however you set it up, to alert you when there was a fire within so many miles of your current location. Not saying it's 100% accurate, but it's better than nothing. There's also a bunch of websites that will give you fire information, not only locally, but statewide and nationwide. You can research that on your own. There's a ton of different applications for that. And again, if the fire's burning for your house, I will evacuate you without the sheriff's authorization.
No, absolutely. This is according to, you know,
Right.
what the state
But
law
I'm just-
allows.
Right.
But one of the things we're looking at in the emergency management field is we do not have a large enough footprint for the sheriffs to be in every area. And so those kind of things are like, okay, let's get a workaround, and this is the workaround.
That is
It's
the
basically
workaround.
authorizing, you know, the chief level officers of the fire department to do these things without having to talk to us. We're just gonna back their play as we go. And it's about getting people out of harm's way quickly.
It's called doing the right thing and begging for forgiveness later.
And, you know, one thing that I think would be interesting for the Brooktrails and Sherwood communities to consider is doing a practice run evacuation. I think it takes a lot of coordination. It would not be easy to plan, but I think you do learn a lot about where there might be hangups and where things do or don't work. I'm sure that he's not happy, I just recommend it.
We have done that in the past.
Right.
We have taken a group, and we used to hold tabletop drills, and we took a group of folks out to our evacuation routes and drove through them when they were maintained, which they're not now. But it doesn't mean that you can't do it on your own. Sherwood Road is a public road. You have every right to be on that road and transverse across that county property. Drive Sherwood Road. Learn about where the creek crossing is and whether it's going to be an issue for your vehicle or not.
And, you know, I don't just mean going out North Sherwood.
No, I mean-
Evacuating down, and I think as much as you've done them before, there are a lot of people that flux in and out of Brooktrails, and there's a lot of new homeowners that don't know about North Sherwood or have never gone through
Right.
any type of, you know, emergency planning here in Brooktrails.
John?
But take that time to explore.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's been a lot of articles and talk, and PG&E spokesmen have said that they may, because of the liabilities issues in a extreme fire event, turn off the power grid. My first question would be, does PG&E have that authority, or can law enforcement or the local fire department override that? Because, and my next question is, if the power grid is shut off, does the Brooktrails water system have the alternate power source to run the water pipes? You know, everybody's required to have sprinkler systems, and in the Redwood Valley fires, I've talked to a lot of people that actually saved their homes because they were there with a garden hose, or 2 or 3 neighbors. And so I think it would be devastating to have your water source turned off because PG&E made it a blank. We're going to turn off the power grid in that whole area. So I think that's a real big issue that needs to be addressed, and something that can be decided before a fire event.
So it's my understanding they can, but we had a conversation last week with PG&E and SoCal Edison, and part of their planning process when they do that is they notify the county, you know, so that you have critical infrastructure needs that have to be met. You try to address how those things are going to be met, whether it's a backup generator system that they're going to bring in to power certain utilities and hospitals, and make sure that you have that critical infrastructure needs met before they do that. I don't know that they have all that stuff in place in Northern California yet, because it's relatively kind of a new concept up here. But I know that both PG&E and SoCal Edison are working on that. How do you set that up?
As far as Brooktrails goes, we do have emergency generators available on site that we can power those certain pump areas that we need to. We have 23 water tanks throughout the district, one of them being in Spring Creek. Of those 23 tanks, more than half are gravity fed to the fire hydrants. There's only a few tanks that require a pressure system, which are in the upper elevations. So we do have that plan in place. Additionally, we do not advocate everybody turning on their garden hose and leaving the site, because what that does, it depletes our water system and our tanks. So with that being said, we do have that plan in place.
You may or may not know, there's the ordinance on the table over there, you're allowed up to a 2,500 gallon water storage tank. So you could capture rainwater, have 2,500 gallons at your house, so you could, other than your garden hose, you'd have something that you could use for water. And it's a great idea to have more water for earthquake as well, or irrigation, whatever, but I mean, that's something you can do. And for the rural parcels, most of us are on our own water systems anyway, but again, you can improve those water systems and have firefighting kind of water there, because it's always going to be useful if you have that. And if you have a pump to move it, it's even better. And if you have something that's not connected to the grid for the power outages, that's even better, because if the power goes out to your house, you don't have your pump working, or you don't have your internet working, whatever, so battery backup or generator backup is always good to have for all those emergencies. Another sort of series of questions around vegetation management, funding for that, and who does it. We talked a little bit about like the Fire Safe Council. We can set up a project, and so I used as an example Blue Lake Road, which runs along the ridge between here and the ocean, of doing a fuel break along that road. And so by simply just getting on that Firewise site and putting in some parameters describing that as a project, doesn't take a whole lot of work. That's now on that site, so if funding comes up to do something like that, that program can be considered. We can do more of that throughout the whole area up here. We need to identify projects that are needed like that, fuel breaks and otherwise, because Fire Safe Council does come up with money every once in a while. CAL FIRE and Resource Conservation District, there's some grant monies, and again, that's on another table over here. Paloma's working on some of that for the gates. We could all, again, mostly on the rural subdivisions, we could go after some of that grant money, and that would pay for road improvements as well as for vegetation management kinds of things. So that's another effort that we as a community can plan for and go after some of that grant money. We have to come up with the matching funds, because it's only 75% or 90%, but still, that's a lot of money that people are coming up with to help pay that. We have had in the past the inmate crews working on some fuel breaks, and I see some things in here about, you know, what do the public agencies have as far as versus private services. So maybe some of you guys could talk about that, of what do the public agencies offer for helping people clear vegetation.
In response to that question, also one from earlier, yes, we have an active vegetation management program statewide through CAL FIRE. The question earlier in this one, I would suggest contact the local Fire Safe Council. They can be the clearinghouse for these projects. We've done them in the past up in Pine Mountain. Our fire crews and I think some 3C crews spent a lot of time up there doing a fuel break, shaded fuel break, back and around most of the subdivision. We've done some work with our fire crews up here through a grant with the local district, but if I went back to our CEQA coordinator with 50 individual parcels, he would be displeased. If we have one clearinghouse, and the Fire Safe Council is a great place to start, that can contact me, and we could start the process for a vegetation management program, that would be ideal.
And I would second that. Like I said, I do sit on the Mendocino County Fire Safe Council, and you know, it's really a collection of all of the local fire safe councils, road associations, and we do oversee a fair amount of grant funding opportunities and help coordinate those. And I fully agree, the important thing is to come up with a very defined project and to have a group of people together with that defined project to go forward with the grant. And a lot of these grants come up with a fairly, you know, short notice as money comes available. So I think if you can have it written out and ready to go and have these shovel-ready projects, it really gives you a leg up. You just have it ready, it's written, you know you want it, and when funding's available, you can get it done.
And sort of along those lines, there's several questions about what services. Home inspection was one of the questions, and Jeff, I think you mentioned that. Under the Firewise group, one of the things we have to do is a risk assessment, and that's everything from starting at your house, looking around vegetation, going out your driveway to the road to get to your house. It's all of that, you know, it's like how risky is that environment. And so everything from what's the inside of your house to the outside of your house and working all the way back out to the public roads. So what kind of assistance can, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do for helping us with that risk assessment work?
Well, the risk assessment is actually, it's a community-wide assessment that Firewise requires. And so it summarizes general problems, things that go right. But on the individual basis, there's plenty of materials here. I actually have a pad of cheat sheets that you can pull one off, take home, and it'll actually walk you through things to look at your own home. And CAL FIRE comes out and does an inspection, but what they're inspecting mostly is the legal requirements for Public Resources Code 4290, which is your 100-foot dispensable space, screens on your chimneys, those kind of things. And so legal requirements are usually the bare minimum of what I would think would make your house fire safe. And so going to as far as you can reach, and also looking at things besides what's legally required, like Shimendo Mills here with good ideas on replacing existing materials with fire-resistant materials. There's a lot of products that have been developed in the last 10 years. We have fire-resistant paints now that you can paint your house with. Actually will, when heat hits them, they chemically react and kind of create a barricade. So there's a lot of things that you can do that, you know, aren't well known to the general public.
Would the risk assessment include vegetation along roadways and
Sure,
driveways?
we look at all the problems.
Yeah,
Egress, water supply,
Yeah.
signage, communications. Those are all Firewise goals that you can put into your project plan.
Okay. And related to that, a couple of questions asked about training people. I know one thing about shelter in place hasn't been mentioned. It's in the evacuation plans that we have. You may not be able to get out. I mean, I know in my situation, I'm way out in the middle of the woods, and if there's a fire going and I don't know where it's going, I may be driving right into it. So we might all need to be concerned about sheltering in place. Are there any, other than the CERT training, are there other kinds of opportunities for people to get trained in how to do shelter in place kind of activities?
Well, I don't know about specific training, but certainly there's information you can walk yourself through. I know some homeowners associations I have worked with have hired professional inspectors to go out and inspect every home in their subdivision. We've actually had people that have gotten volunteers in their community to become home inspectors, and you give them just a little bit of power and a notepad, and they are ruthless. And so, but you know, community policing from within, I think, is a wonderful idea. So is peer pressure. I often advocate, if you're going to do a Firewise home, put it on the busiest intersection you can find, so that everybody drives by it to see, A, it doesn't look so bad, B, it's a possibility of what I can do at my own home, and again, peer pressure and what about me comes into place.
Not sure if we're talking sheltering in place once the wildfire's there, or if your plan is, hey, wildfire's coming, I'm gonna protect my home no matter what. We always advise that if the evacuation order is given to leave, if your plan is that you are going to shelter in place, the biggest thing you can do for yourself is to make sure your house is fire hardened per all the stuff that we've been talking about today. Get the inspections, have the Fire Safe Council come out and do the inspection. We'll come out, call us, and we'll come out and do the 4291 inspection for you. But be ready to follow all the documentation there if you are going to stay. That's the biggest thing you can do for yourselves. You know, having the vehicle backed in, have that exit strategy. Even though your plan is to shelter in place, you need to have an exit strategy.
And I just have to throw in a few words in regards to animals, given my veterinary role. You know, animals, you have to have a plan in place. And, you know, even if you're going to shelter in place, you need to think about what you're going to do with those animals. You know, putting your phone number on the animals, you know, if it's a horse or a cow, spray painted on, or paint sticks, putting on the hoof, whatever it is, so that if you do let them loose, that people can then, you know, get a hold of you. You know, if you are going to shelter in place and leave your animals there, you make sure if you let them out of the barn, close the barn doors, because they will go back in the barn and they'll burn in the barn. If, you know, you're in your house and keeping your house safe and they stay in the barn. A lot of them will run back into the barn. You know, if you have horses with fly masks on, because a lot of these are when it's warm, you know, take those fly masks off. The worst burned horse that I dealt with at the fairgrounds had a fly mask on, couldn't see where it's going, ended up in the flames, and the fly mask melted to its face. So, you know, things you don't necessarily think about. So, you know, don't leave animals in crates. That was a big problem too in the Redwood Valley Fire. Make sure you're letting animals out of crates. You know, you don't want them to get stuck somewhere just because you chose to shelter in place. And a lot of these, I think, mostly happen because people didn't have time. They just had to get out and they didn't have time for their animals. But, you know, if you have an animal that you're gonna have to take by trailer, either have a trailer or have somebody who has a trailer that could help you. Don't let that be the very first time your horse has ever gotten into a trailer, because it might not.
Or they're not halter broke.
Or they're not halter broke, or, you know, by the time they, you know, the rescue workers get it into a trailer, the horse is so stressed out, it's tied up, it's dehydrated, and it goes on to other issues because of, you know, the stress it had to go through to travel. So just don't forget to put that emergency plan in place for your pets and livestock as well.
Right, here's a question about finding people's homes. We talked about the address, but I know some places like this was talking about over on Third Gate that some of the street, the houses are on different streets than their address. The county gave them an address and they might not be driving down the right road. So is there a way we can get like very local maps that would show where a property's driveway is located, and have that be available maybe even electronically for firefighters coming from outside the area as well as the local people? I mean, what can we do to make it easier for you guys to find our houses other than just putting the address sign out there?
So I'll speak to that one there. As far as the addressing goes, I know this, we're looking at this sign over here, and this has kind of been the standard that's been given lately. Just know that the standards have changed even, and that sign's out of date. We're looking for larger than that. We want 4-inch letters now on all our signs. I met with Planning and Building and Transportation the other day, and as we issue building permits and other permits for anything, we're going to start requiring roads be labeled and per the county standards. So we are addressing that. The plans, we haven't worked out all the kinks yet, but we're going to try and have a way of, as the permit process goes through, we'll get those on our maps and they'll be put into all our emergency response maps. But like everything else, it takes time to go through and do that. So what we're looking at is access routes with serving more than a couple houses or dwelling units will have to be named. So that, and that's been in the SRA standards for years. It just hasn't really been enforced. So we're looking into moving forward with that, and just to have this better access and response times for everybody. Same thing, the address signage now will go, you know, you've got one, we're going to require it on one post out there. So if your driveway serves 14 addresses, we're going to expect that there's going to be 14 addresses on a single post out of the entrance there, so we know where to go. Those have all been state law for a while. We're, you know, like everyone else, we're understaffed and haven't been able to enforce that. We're trying to get out there and do that now as we're doing the inspections and noting the problem areas and making those corrections and informing the public of it.
And I think as we move towards that, at this point, it's again, I think, important to know your neighbors, know who lives near you, know their names, know how to get to their house. I mean, it might seem silly to say that, but not everybody reaches out to their neighbors. I mean, certainly during the evacuations this time, the deputies had kicked me out of my house. I got to my parents, I'm hooking up trailers there. Deputies come up the road with their lights on, and I'm supposed to be on my safe spot at this point.
No preferential treatment.
They were lost. They came out the second time because they were lost and they couldn't find the person that they were looking for. And you know, they were trying to do a welfare check on someone, couldn't find the address. So I mean, it is a reality. So
this is an everyday response problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, ambulance services, fire, and law enforcement, we have had this problem for years. The quicker we can get to you, the better we can help you.
And that person, I did know their name and I knew where they lived and I could pass them on. And I think that's the important thing. Make sure you know where people live and who's around you.
Well, what are the maps like, though? I mean, I know when I was on the fire department here, we had a little book with paper maps and things. I mean, is there with GIS mapping, like Josh, what you're doing, is there a way to, like, I'll just give my case. If you use Google to try to get to my place, it takes you way to the top of my property. My driveway's way down at the bottom of the property. Everybody misses it, you know, because that's where their map tells them to go. Can we get, like, individual parcel, that level of, you can say the driveway's down here, the house is over here, and locate those kind of things on mapping?
The technology exists, we're not there yet. That's the best answer I have. Every local agency's doing something a little bit different. I think we're all moving down the same road, but yeah, the technology's there. We're countywide, we're not there.
So are you still using paper maps basically in the fire trucks?
Yep.
And so if somebody comes from out of the area, somebody has to give them something, or maybe not?
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, we are. We're trying to, like I said, we're trying to move that direction to go electronic, but there's limitations with the electronics too. You know, we live in an area without a lot of cell service. We'd have to get some mesh systems up in place to have that happen. It's a funding issue, and we're just not there yet.
So would a community mapping project, like with this kind of map here, if you had more details on where the driveways are and where the houses are, something like that, and then you could reduce that down to pages in a book, I mean, is that something that could work?
So we have that. We do have that. It's a matter of updating them.
Yeah, so that's something we as a community can do, is just keep upgrading our own, you know, locating those things in addition to our signage. That could be part of the Firewise plan. Go ahead, Jeff.
And from a local standpoint, we do currently use paper maps in the apparatus. It's in a binder, it's roughly 34 pages long. Not only does it include the addresses based on the street, it also has water supply, hydrants, lat longs to all of our landing zones throughout the district. It's quite a book of information. And if we do have units from out of the area, we do have copies available that we just pass off those units as they come in. It has an index, they can look up an individual address, and it will guide them to the best area that we have for those parcels. Also, our local cooperators, being Willits Fire, they have a copy of our run book as we have a copy of theirs. We also have a copy of Cal Fire's newly published run book that is county-wide. So the agencies, you know, trying to locate addresses, as said before, is a huge problem, and it's also a huge issue with us trying to keep up with. So we are working on it.
Brian, I'm going to ask, is address signage an issue in Brooktrails proper itself?
Yes.
Okay.
So typically what happens in Brooktrails, I'll address it specifically within the township. I would have to say probably 75% of the addresses are posted on one side of the street, being the mailbox. So the mail person can find the mailbox to drop off the mail. It doesn't really help us coming from the other direction. Typically, we go right by it, have to look in the rearview mirror and realize, that was it. Put in reverse and back up. So we are asking the residents of Brooktrails, this is something that we have tried to deal with, is posting the address visible to the state standard, both sides of the road, from so many feet, just for that reason. For structural fire response, there's times where all the apparatus doesn't approach from the same direction. So we need to be able to have that ability to be able to see it from both sides, or both directions of the roadway. Does that answer your question, Rick?
Yes.
Okay.
So one thing I want to bring up too about evacuations is, and we run into the issue of privacy versus emergency evacuations, is citizens at risk, specifically people that are not ambulatory, they have medical issues, especially if they're bedridden. To get ambulances in to evacuate these people is problematic at best. We saw that in the Valley Fire. We had several fatalities of people that literally could not get out of bed, and nobody could get to them in time to help them. So finding those kind of people and finding a way to keep the information secure but available to emergency responders is a project. I know at one time Lake County Dispatch had a file that people could voluntarily give that information to them, so that if they were going to be dispatched to that scene, they could actually pull up that information. But within a community like this, local fire department or somebody should be, the citizen should have a way of communicating that their neighbor or their loved ones need special handling. Because we had the Clayton fire in Lake County, and we had to evacuate a hospital. And that was a nightmare. We pulled in ambulances from 4 other counties to get enough people there to transport them to another facility. I imagine that Howard Memorial was thinking about that in the middle of the night when the fire was looking up the hill on them. So that kind of information, again, can be part of your Firewise project, but you need to think about how you can get that information safely to first responders.
One of the things with special needs populations is, it happened in San Diego and it was a great idea and a lot of the agencies are starting to consider it, is if you have enough time before your evacuation order is a half an hour ahead of time, you go in and get those special needs people out before you let the general public know that there's an evacuation order, because otherwise they'll never get out. We'll never get the ambulance up to get them with the contraflow going the other direction. So that's one of those things, if we can have that collection point, we can go get those folks, get them out of the harm's way, and then, you know, if you have the time, you know, that's time.
And I think, you know, if you have the time, I mean, that's what we're here for, to do all the things that we can do now, because you're not gonna have a lot of time necessarily. So, you know, go home tomorrow and videotape everything in your house so that you have, you know, an actual copy of, for insurance purposes. I mean, there's just a lot of things that happen after the fire, as we have a lot of people in this county now facing, that are not things you plan for. You know, you think about that emergency evacuation, how to stay alive, but you need to also think about how am I going to replace my stuff? How am I, you know, go home, look at your insurance policy. Do you have, you know, the extra riders on it for cost, or for upgrades? Because, you know, code upgrades, that could make or break whether or not you can rebuild. So, you know, look at your insurance policy and see, are you gonna actually be able to rebuild on what your insurance policy covers? You know, if you have expensive stuff, get that extra insurance for the expensive items. But, you know, go home and make a record of what you really do and don't have.
And keep a copy off-site.
Yes. It's a good job for kids too. I mean, that's, you know, keep your kids busy, go around, photograph everything. It's on their phones.
John, I had a question about the park course, that there's a trail, walking trail, bike kind of trail, that's closed off now, right?
The park course is only a walking, biking trail up until the end of the district property, which then continues on as private property into the city of Willits. That is, the segment of the park course that is district owned is open. It is not considered an evacuation beyond that point.
Okay, and how about the safe, what ball field used to be a safe zone, is that?
It was stated earlier that we only had one collection point in Brooktrails, and that is false. We have this area here, Old Grove across the street, and the ballpark is access to collect people as well.
Okay, and that'd be considered a safe zone as far as surviving an initial?
That would be considered a collection point.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Just a couple of notes. We brought up butane earlier, public information. I know we see these cylinders all over the place. I mean, is there anything happening for public awareness around? I think somebody mentioned it earlier, but even if you see your neighbors, like you're just like, you know, piles of butane cylinders around, whatever, you know, what can the citizens do to help reduce that? And is there some kind of public information campaign about, you know, and people selling it and everything else? Because I mean, I know it's legal to sell it, but somebody's buying cases of butane cylinders, you just have to wonder.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any kind of a public education campaign. You know, if you have concerns that one of your neighbors has a butane lab, because that's what they are, they're highly volatile, you can call that into law enforcement and we can actually investigate those things. Because they're, you know, they're this extremely dangerous fire, you know, and part of the, you know, marijuana legalization process that the county's going through is we're trying to address those things at the county and local level, but a lot of those things, they're very restrictive in the labs that they can have, and there's a lot of regulation that goes with it. So if you think somebody's outside that regulating process and they are creating a danger to the public, just let law enforcement know.
Okay, and question about, since Brooktrails now has satellite internet access, would that be available for the public if there was an event, sort of like what happened at the Willits Library? People without internet could come and use that, or is that discouraged?
There's free Wi-Fi at this building.
Yeah, free Wi-Fi at this building.
There is free Wi-Fi at this building as long as the cable company keeps pumping the internet However, when that goes down, we do have a satellite backup. The draw on the system with everybody coming through to try to use it is discouraged because there's not enough bandwidth to support that. That is designed specifically for as a backup infrastructure for the township at this point. However, if you can get on to the cell tower extenders that we have for Verizon and AT&T, I think that would be okay. But as far as getting into the Wi-Fi, that point is locked out.
Okay. And along those lines, I know in the meetings we've had, a couple of things that I was sort of not aware of, although I should be. A lot of calls came into the fire department and a lot of calls came into 911 to just ask about what's going on. And unfortunately, that doesn't really help because the 911 call going in is to report something. So if you see a fire, or you have an emergency, but calling them up saying, can you tell me what's going on? Not a good idea because it just swamps the lines. Same thing with calling the fire department. Now, again, goes back to how do we know? And a couple of the comments came in is there's some kind of early notice, not, you know, like I know that there's like what, warning, and then, or excuse me, yeah, there's 3 stages, right? Yeah, and then there's the notification at the end. So it's like stages of, you know, yellow, orange, and red or whatever. But how can we get some earlier information? Because again, I think most of us were talking to our friends, looking at Facebook, listening to the radio for hours and hours before we started really getting sheriff's reports coming across some of the public, you know, information. So is there efforts being made to try to get some public information out to let people know a little earlier? Hey, you don't have to worry in Brooktrails, it's over here, it's not coming your way, that kind of thing, to help people to not call in and tie up the system.
So, in the initial TAC phases, we would be remiss to make a whole lot of notification. We can't, especially a fire at night of that magnitude, I couldn't have honestly, on the fires I've been on, tell you what it's going to do. And I would never want to tell somebody they don't have to evacuate when they would.
Right.
And conversely, I wouldn't want to order request an evacuation if it wasn't going to be needed. So again, when it's a fire like the Redwood fire, there is an inherent delay in getting correct information.
And I guess I would just stress, you know, be very wary of Facebook. You know, I set up a press conference as early as I possibly could once the roads were open. And, you know, to try to get the actual information out there, because there was a lot of information being passed as far as Willits goes that, you know, that the buildings on top of the ridge had burned down, that the hospital was evacuated, that it was coming through the valley. I mean, there was so much misinformation. So I would make sure that you are looking at press releases from the sheriff's office and OES. I mean, I think their Facebook pages are very good. And if you're looking at Facebook, you know, make sure it is one of the forwarded ones that is an official one, simply because, you know, people are reporting stuff that they think they heard from somebody else. And you just have to be very careful that we're not causing panic, because, you know, we don't need people evacuating from Brooktrails when it doesn't need evacuating and heading into areas that are already overloaded and the hotels can't handle it. You know, we just had a lot of issues with panic, in my opinion, that just based on false information.
Well, and the other thing too, and I want to reiterate, the 911, if you don't have an emergency at your location, don't tie up the 911 system. We only have so many lines coming in, and that night, I think both the CAL FIRE ECC, which is their dispatch center, and our dispatch center, we had 2 each dispatchers, and their call volume went up like 1,000%. And we were, at the time, just down there, dropping calls that we couldn't get to. You know, it was just one of those things as people were calling in. So if you can reduce that load on the dispatch, eventually we got more dispatchers coming in, but that's our standard run at night is 2 dispatchers. And if you overwhelm them, then somebody with legitimate need may get missed. You know, we don't want to see that happen as well. But there is that, we didn't know what the fire footprint was on that until well into the next day. We just don't know. In the utter chaos of that first 24-hour period, we may not know what that fire looks like.
Right. Yeah, well, and I know that Rick Ellert mentioned that the sheriff's office OES is looking at possibly putting in some broadcast on existing towers so that you could have like an FM radio or AM radio kind of broadcast. I know like Lake Tahoe and a number of other districts have that sort of local emergency broadcast just for one-way information to get that official information out.
Correct, but that may not, it may not speed it up though.
Mhm.
Because really what we're trying to get out on that first initial broadcast is accurate information on what we're actually facing. And if we don't have that yet, it almost is counterproductive to get information out that we don't know.
I think there was a
We used to have
sense,
fire lookouts, which I think are no longer, they're not manned anymore, fire lookouts. But my suggestion would be that we can have a volunteer, people that live up in the ridges, I live up in Spring Creek, with the kind of wind that we got that night, we know what that wind meant, we did. And so at that point, this would cost no money. We could have volunteers go out and look on those kinds of nights. We could take shifts for 2 hours and a thermos of coffee. But if we, well, you know what? It's cheap. It's only our time. But what we could do if we did see a fire, then what would we do? Could we then call 911?
Absolutely.
Okay, that would be a
Absolutely.
good use of our community. We could volunteer that. We could be the first defensive that
Well,
you
and that's
guys
part of
have.
this planning process right here that you're going through, is your neighbors are always your
That's
best
it.
source of information,
Okay.
you know, as you come together in something like this. And so if you work together to communicate and other things, and you're taking care of each other. That's really kind of what a neighborhood's about.
And I have,
Anderson Valley is, that lookout theory that you have there, Anderson Valley has been doing that for years, with their people that live on top of the ridges and the hills up there. And they've reported a few fires over the years. One of their lookouts did the same thing last year and reported one of the lightning strikes, when we had the lightning roll through.
And to tag on to what you said, you live in a prime location for that. And yeah, if you're gonna be up in the middle of the night, have a thermos of coffee. But if, we will take the report however it comes. And part of the reason that the once statewide, countrywide network of fire lookouts no longer exists, and except in a very, very few locations, is because folks have moved out into the wildland urban interface, the coverage of cell phones and what have you. In this county, we utilize co-op. It's a cooperative effort between the timber industry, private landowners, and CAL FIRE and the county chiefs for aerial fire watch in the summer. Our lookouts, we don't have a need for them anymore. But on windy nights, anybody that, if you see a glow, we welcome it.
one other thing, it's a tool you can use, especially for getting prepared, getting ahead of the curve. The Weather Service issues fire weather watches, fire weather warnings. You can actually sign up for an app that they will send you a text message when one of those is predicted for your, or issued for your area. And so they knew that wind event was coming. They have a system of green, yellow, orange, red. Southern California actually has now a new category, purple, which means, yes, we knew, we're telling you a wind event. It's going to be a really bad wind event. Something very unusual. So, but those are usually issued 20 to 48 hours ahead of time. And again, now you've got a little bit of warning just to start thinking about things.
I'd like to add as well that the Brooktrails Fire Department Facebook page does post red flag warnings and extreme weather events, not only just fire weather, but also winter weather events. So that's another way to keep updated. As soon as we get notification that there's going to be a red flag warning in our area, whether it's Brooktrails, Willits Valley, what have you, we post it up on our page as well as a notification of sorts.
and I know the Pine Mountain Fire Safe Council had brought up the idea of actually finding somebody who would be willing to volunteer to hoist a red flag and actually fly that red flag down at the bottom, so when you go home, you know. So that's another thought, because I think it just means a lot more to see it flapping out there.
Can I ask you a question? I would really like it, I know you're worried about crazed evacuations and, you know, that are unnecessary, but where I live on the end of a dirt road, and there's only one way out. I have to gather animals, there's things I have to do to prepare. So if I knew there was just a notification that there's a fire across the river, it may be contained, but just be alert. You know, don't take my hearing aid out at night, or, you know, things like that. So I would like to see you all put notifications out, not just time to go, or get ready, or you're going to be evacuated. I really need more prep time than I think that you would allow for me in my situation and plenty of other people.
The CAL FIRE app would do that for you. It would advise you if there was a fire nearby.
It would.
Anything over
Okay,
10
you
a.m.
don't look for that.
And that,
I've
you
had
define
that
it within a
happen.
certain
There
area.
was a fire across the river for me on Thursday, and no one told me about it. And there was fires in Brooktrails, and no one told me about it. And I'm hooked on Nixle, and I get Lake County notifications of all kinds of stuff. You know, there's a fire on such and such a road or whatever. You guys don't put anything out. I've gotten one notification on Nixle since the Everbridge.
The county's not on Nixle.
I know that.
Well, part of the.
How about Everbridge? I signed up for that too. One notification since the fires and there's been fires in Brooktrails, there's been fires on Third Gate, there was a fire out on Sherwood Ranch. Nobody's telling me.
So
Because it didn't directly threaten you.
That doesn't matter. If there's a fire across the river from me, I want to know about it because in the middle of the night, I want to be alert. That's all.
I have to be honest, we all have to assume some personal liability and responsibility here. We moved into the wildland knowing well, when we moved here, we all knew Sherwood Road was basically one way in, one way out, and we moved into a heavily forested area. You cannot expect these agencies that sit here and your government to tell you everything that's going on. It's not feasible, it's not possible. We can only do what we can do, and I think warning people of a fire that's not directly threatening them at this point in the stage of the game is something that we're not capable of doing. We don't have the resources to do that at this point.
I think this is a very important message, and it's a key message for all of us. A very important question. Yes, in some respects, it is yo-yo. You're on your own, and we have an amazing community here. This has been a very important conversation. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
So can I add one thing to that?
You may.
And here's some of the considerations that go into that is what we find with some people. I mean, some people are very attuned to getting information and paying attention. Other people, if you oversaturate them with notification, they just tune out completely. And then you have almost no one listening to you anymore. So it's a balance of over inundation of information, because they will just turn you off and they'll opt out of your whole system. And so
Within a certain number of
Well, thank you.
miles-
Can I make a suggestion? Have this conversation just after the event, after we finish for the break, because we're just about on time now, and I'm very conscious of everyone's time. I really want to appreciate all of you for coming today. This is the first of a series of meetings, and talk to your neighbours. So once again, do look at the resources. We thank our panel. Very, very kind of you to be here. Thank you.
Please stay for lunch. The whole idea here was to keep you with some food so that we can share some food together. And all these folks are going to stick, or most of them are going to stick around for a while too. So if you have other follow-on questions, we'll post these other questions on the board too. And please volunteer. We need some help. So anybody else that can volunteer, we'd sure appreciate it.